Hello, and welcome to the Educators and Immigration Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerardo Mancilla. I immigrated to the United States at a young age and am currently working as an assistant professor of education. In this podcast, we will explore the intersection between various immigration statuses and how that relates to our K-12 educational system. We will explore how educators can support immigrant families, undocumented youth, and students with DACA. Join us to learn more about these topics, listen to our guest stories, and explore resources to support students. This is the Educators and Immigration Podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Educators and Immigration Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerardo Mancilla. We took a small break over the holiday season, but we're back recording, talking to amazing people, and continuing to learn about how to support undocumented students. Today, I'm very happy to have Reyna Montoya with us. She is the founder and the CEO of Aliento. She is also a 2016 Sorors, a Justice Fellow, a 2017 Echoing Green Fellow, a Forbes 30 Under 30 Social Entrepreneurs, and an Athena 2019 recipient of the Greater Phoenix Chamber of Commerce, among many other awards. Reyna is also the founder of Aliento, a non-for-profit organization with the vision of creating a place where human potential is nurtured and not defined by your immigration status. Aliento serves undocumented, DACA, and mixed status families to transform trauma into hope and action. They focus on well-being, emotional healing, and leadership development of those impacted by inequities of lacking an immigration status. Reyna has engaged in local, state, and national platforms to advance justice for immigrant communities. She holds a bachelor's degree of political science and transborder studies and a dance minor from Arizona State University. She also holds a master's of education in secondary education from Grand Canyon University, and most recently, she has completed the executive education program from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Reyna, it is amazing to reconnect with you again and to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Gerardo. It's so amazing to connect with you again. It's been a minute.
So Reyna and I actually met back in 2017. We took a group of students from Wisconsin down to Arizona, and it was so impactful because the students that went were able to see how different activist groups were working together, and so it was an amazing partnership. Later on in 2019, we were able to take a second group. And again, we connected, and it was such a transformational experience for the students. So thank you for being able to host us as well. Can we begin by having you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know I read a little bit about your bio, but can you tell us your story and whatever you feel comfortable sharing?
Of course. I was born in Tijuana, Mexico, and about at the age of 10, I migrated from Tijuana to Nogales. So I actually had an internal migration within Mexico first before migrating to Arizona, where I call home. At that time, as a little girl, I didn't know where we were moving. Not a lot of answers were given to me. And later on, unfortunately, I will learn about the trauma that my dad had to face. He unfortunately had been kidnapped by Mexican police, and we were escaping violence. And I didn't know as a little kid. I think my parents, like any other parents, try to protect us and shelter us. And that really informs a lot about who I am today and who I aspire to be growing up in Arizona undocumented. I constantly face so many barriers within education about being judged either by my accent or being judged by my immigration status or lack of immigration status, in this case as an undocumented student, to then having to constantly have the fear and anxiety of not knowing if Sheriff Arpaio, who was really famous for his raids, that was going to be separating my family, and having to face and fight for my dad's deportation. He was in deportation proceedings during the Obama administration. So that really, really impacted me. And not only growing up undocumented in a place like Arizona that had been so difficult for immigrants and had been seen as an epicenter of hate towards the immigrant community that like rippled across the nation. There were so many copycat laws that really were copying Arizona in the very bad anti-immigrant sentiment, and then having to fight for the DREAM Act, to then becoming a classroom teacher myself. So many people might not know that, but I was a high school teacher for a couple of years, and one of the most humbling experiences that I have had. I think that other couple things that have informed a lot of the work that I do and who I am today is that I am the oldest sister of three. I have an incredible family that is a mixed immigration status family that I'm sure we'll dive into that, what that means. As I said, I'm the oldest sister of three, and then I also have very interesting heritage. I don't have one family member that has stayed in one place. So I feel that Arizona has really become home. And I also now I'm starting to embrace a little bit more of my Chinese heritage that I learned that on my dad's side, my great grandpa migrated from China to Mexico. So yeah, it just allows me to connect in a very different way and be reminded how long migration has been going on and how it impacts us as human beings.
Well, and that idea of we're constantly moving, we're constantly changing. First of all, thank you for sharing so much about yourself and the drive and what the passion is behind it. I know that we'll talk a little bit more about it, but the focus that you also put on healing and thinking about the mental health component as we go through difficult situations. How do we keep ourselves together and how do we hold on to ourselves to be able to move forward with it? So I greatly appreciate that part of it as well. You mentioned Sheriff Arpaio. Can you give us a framework in terms of like approximately what year to what year he was the sheriff of Arizona? Because as you mentioned, that brought a lot of attention to Arizona and how they were targeting undocumented populations, as well as all of the tent city and everything else that happened with Arizona.
Yeah, Sheriff Yo had been the sheriff since the 90s all the way to 2016 when he lost his reelection. So I would say that he started getting more popularity around his harsh treatment. I think you mentioned Tent City, and for those people that don't know or not familiar with Arizona, Arizona gets pretty hot. We get to sometimes to 120 or 115-degree weather over the summer. So the conditions are pretty harsh. And Sheriff Yo would have tent cities, like literally tents, and where people would have to be under those conditions, predominantly a lot of undocumented immigrants that were victims of rapes, typically at the workplace. And here in Arizona, it's a felony to work without a social security number. If you have a fake social security number, then you get identity theft, which is a type of felony in the state of Arizona. So very dehumanizing conditions. He would also appear in TV because he would speak very badly about the undocumented community, and he would make even some of the folks that were incarcerated, he would make them wear pink underwears or pink attire just to dehumanize them. So there was a lot of like trauma around within the community. I would say that a lot of more of the prevalence happened in the late 2000s, where Maricopa County started using more collaboration with ICE enforcement. And there was also after the late 2000s, because we know when 287G agreements have started becoming more prevalent, which I don't want to get too policy wonky here, but once an educator, always an educator, right? So 287G is technically, for simple terms, is that collaboration between ICE and CBP or ICE agents, right? So many people in the community know it as the Polimigra. So that's something that really impacted a lot of communities. It created a lot of trauma, a lot of fear that going to the grocery stores or being dropped off school could lead to a potential deportation of your loved ones, because typically any type of contact with law enforcement could technically meant that you were put in deportation proceedings. So it was a very difficult time for the immigrant community here in Arizona. And with the passage of SB 1070 in 2010, the Show Me Your Papers law, things even got out of hand, where we started seeing racial profiling. Maricopa County Sheriff's Community's Office ended up getting a lot of litigation from the federal government, where we wasted millions of dollars in taxpayer money to ensure that the federal government was trying to monitor at the sheriff's office, because there were a lot of racial and civil rights litigations based on racial profiling that happened here in Arizona.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned 287G. Here in Wisconsin, we actually had one of the counties that actually was doing the same thing. And it was working with immigration even here in Wisconsin. And so it's important to kind of acknowledge how it might happen all around the United States. But as you mentioned, Arizona was ground zero for that. So, as all of this is happening, there's also a passion for supporting undocumented students and to fight for justice. Can you talk to us a little bit about your own passion, your own drive? You mentioned your own history, but can you talk to us about that passion for yourself for supporting undocumented and DACA students?
As we were talking just a little bit, I think that many people remember Arizona as like for the places about racial profiling because of the sheriff jail. But what many people don't know, it's all the different policies that we're passing to really create this culture of making the lives of undocumented people and their children as miserable as possible so they would leave. So as I was growing up, I started facing different barriers from teachers that wanted me to speak Spanish in the classroom, even though that it was before class began, because of that fear of, oh, you're talking badly about your peers or that perception and that, microaggressions. But also sometimes that was really rooted in fear from educators because there was a policy passed that it made it illegal for teachers to instruct classes or give instructions in any other language but English. So you could tell that teachers who have so many different responsibilities within the classroom, underfunded communities, sometimes it was that fear of just like, no, you're only allowed to speak English. And it created this culture of that nothing but English was worthy or was meaningful. So it's very difficult as a eighth grader trying to grab around like, why are you being punished just to speak your language or just to be able to ask for help? So that was some of the barriers that I started seeing. And then later on, another thing that really impacted me personally was when I was getting ready to go to college, like many other undocumented students at that time. That was a world before DACA. So DACA or Dreamer were not really popular at that time. They would call us very humanizing words. And in Arizona in 2006, voters passed a law that prohibited undocumented students to have access to in-state tuition and also took away our scholarships. So I was one of those students that was severely impacted by it when I was in high school. I had earned all these scholarships based on my grades and my community involvement, and then they were taken away out of the sudden. So that was a very difficult, challenging moment. Imagine all of that, being a teenager, trying to figure out college, first gen student, couple that with the big sediment of immigrants don't belong here. You shouldn't exist. Your existence is just problematic. We don't want it here. And then by the grace of God and a lot of the support of my mom and dad that who didn't graduate high school but were my first bigger cheerleaders said that they really wanted me to go to college and they were wanted to support me. So that's when I got really involved in the Dream Act movement back in 2010 when we were fighting for the Dream Act. And I think that was a breaking point for me to start kind of making sense of all these policies that were impacting me, knowing that I was not the only one, that there were thousands of students that were facing the same barriers that I was, but some of them were more afraid that I was, that they didn't want to share that they were undocumented. I think now everybody's like, DACA, Dreamer, undocumented students, we support you. And there's so much more that we can do, but I think that there's a friendlier environment that it was back in the day in 2010. So I would say that I felt that sense of responsibility of being able to speak up and share my story and do something about it rather than remaining in the sidelines.
Thank you, and thank you for also sharing the history of it because it's been years and years of struggles and of fighting, both for the Dream Act, the DACA program, and you mentioned in-state tuition in Arizona. We were talking a little bit about it before we got on the call, but Arizona, there's been in-state has been in place, but then it has been retracted. And you mentioned that currently it's going back on the ballot for this year.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster of emotions. We didn't have in-state tuition all the way to 2012. And then in 2012, when the DACA program was announced after amazing organizing, I remember having conversations with the White House and the Obama administration that they didn't want to do the DACA program, but we got it done. And we know that it's not enough, but it was a huge opportunity, right? And one of those opportunities meant that if you had DACA status, you could apply for in-state tuition. So unfortunately, those who were outside of the DACA program, who were undocumented, still had to pay out-of-state tuition. But there was a moment in Arizona history that if you were a DACA recipient, you could pay in-state tuition. That got litigated. So we were in litigation since the moment it was available in 2012. And then from there, we won, we lost, we won, we appeal, all of that, all the way to 2018. April of 2018, when the Arizona Supreme Court decided to interpret that even if you had DACA status, then you don't have the authority to have in-state tuition based on the 2006 proposition that was passed. So then they removed in-state tuition. So now if you're undocumented or DACA, you don't have access to in-state tuition. So we decided to do something about it. We were again had a moment of choice, and we saw that many of our students were really stressed, had a lot of anxiety, a lot of uncertainty about the future. That was in the times of the Trump administration, that again, the environment was so anti-immigrant that we decided to start building coalitions and say the students want an opportunity to go to college, and we have an opportunity to either create pathways to higher education or continue to put barriers in front of students regardless of their immigration status. So we started building a lot of coalitions at state legislature. We won in the Senate. We never got a hearing in the House. That happened for 2 years, and then COVID happened. But even within that last year, after a lot of organizing and not giving up, and the tenacity of our students to sharing their stories and their strategy, that this is what we wanted, this would be transformational for students and for their families, we finally got it done. So the Arizona State Legislature, working in a bipartisan manner, both Republicans and Democrats, we had Republican sponsors who decided to do right to our students. And then now they're putting it in the hands of the voters. So voters get to vote this November 8th of 2022, have this great opportunity to make things right for Arizona dreamers and provide in-state tuition and access to scholarships regardless of immigration status. And that came from people like me and Jose and our students who were impacted or who are being impacted. And we said, we need to do something about it. And now, hopefully, knock on wood, this is going to become a reality and start changing that horrible reputation that we have in Arizona.
Thank you so much for sharing that information. And again, it talks to the amount of work and collaboration and grassroots work that has to happen. And one of the ways you mentioned Jose as one of the people that has been influential, and he's also part of Aliento. So in 2016, you were awarded a Soros Justice Fellow, and this allowed you to start Aliento. Can you talk a little bit more about what the Soros Justice Fellow is and how did that help springboard the Aliento non-for-profit organization?
Yeah, so I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that I was going to be founding a nonprofit. I actually had a lot of criticisms about nonprofits. I still do, but I think that it's been a very humbling experience. I think for me, I saw and I had to witness the incredible amount of pain and suffering that the immigrant community goes through. And this is not only from personal experience, but from doing community organizing for years. After doing community organizing at the local and national level, I had the opportunity to become a classroom teacher, as I was mentioning. And, sometimes when you're in social justice spaces or when you're in the immigrant rights movement, sometimes you can become victim of being isolated and only talking in a bubble with like-minded people who are trying to drive change and want to make that. And when I went into the classroom, that was not the reality for my students or the families that I serve. And that was so heartbreaking because maybe it was naiveness. I had this picture that we had, I was coming from a high. We had like one DACA, we had one DAPA. That was before the litigations, but like I was coming out of this high and I was so excited. And I'm like, maybe I can go and continue to support my community through education and little Reyna naiveness, I would say, or hope. That was not the reality within my students. So I became really angry once again about witnessing everything that was going on in my classroom. And I became the immigration teacher, everything related to FAFSA, to parents that were incarcerated or in detention that were deported, students who wanted to apply for DACA. They were, go to Miss Montoya, go to Miss Montoya, which, I was really happy that I could support them and be a connector. But then I started challenging myself. What happens if Miss Montoya gets sick? What happens if Miss Montoya is not here tomorrow? What is the responsibility for institutions, especially education institutions, to support our students regardless of their background? So I became really angry and agitated. And I started seeing also the big emotional wounds that we had as people. Especially there's something very unique when you are going through all these challenges and living in a very difficult environment when you feel like you don't belong, that does something to your spirit, to your heart. And there's not those support systems as undocumented people, or sometimes even DACA recipients. We don't have access to mental health. So what does that look like? And I started trying to, again, I was really angry. I was criticizing all these things like, we don't have this, we don't have that. And I had a mentor who really challenged me and said, Reyna, so it seems like you don't like how other organizations are doing it. You have all these opinions. Why don't you do something about it? So I was like, okay. So she sent me an application for the Soros Justice Fellowship, which is a national fellowship that supports entrepreneurs or people who have been impacted by different systems, especially criminal justice, but other systems as well, to really support them to launch an idea and put it into practice. So they gave you like an 18-month fellowship. They encourage you for use it for your own kind of like salary or living so that you can survive. And then you get to present a proposal. So I wrote a 6-page proposal with a timeline, some of my aspirations that I wanted to do with healing within the community and mixed immigration status families that have been impacted by deportation or just the threat of family separation. So those were the beginnings of Aliento. As I said, I never thought we were going to become a nonprofit, that we were going to be here. But it was really about seeing that need within the community, that we were not having conversations around mental health. And I think that the pandemic, that's one of the things that has really like opened up the eyes for many people. And mental health and self-care now are becoming more mainstream. But when we were launching, nobody was talking about healing. So I think that I feel really proud that having the national platform, it has inspired either from other funders or other organizations to really center the healing of impacted people.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I remember you mentioning when we had taken the students was also this idea of re-energizing. A lot of times when you're doing the grassroots movements or you're on the ground constantly advocating for the changes and constantly doing traveling to either the state level, at the local level, or the national level, and also that idea of re-energizing yourself and how you think about that re-healing for people who are also doing the work. That was one of the things that I took away from the first time that we met as well, of how do we create those spaces to rejuvenate, to re-energize, and to be ready to go and to continue with the fight and continue with the advocacy work as well.
Yeah, we're all humans, right? We're not little robots that we can just like be doing change, but it's like, how do we make sure that we're investing in our healing so we don't replicate those systems that have caused so much harm within our communities?
And you recently celebrated 5 years of having Aliento as a non-for-profit. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that was? Like you mentioned kind of where it started and now kind of where it is.
Yeah, so it's been a huge change, right? We now have reached in 44 different states where people have joined our programming all over, really centered and grounded in the Arizona community. One of my biggest blessings that I have had is that I have a really amazing team of young people and team members that really believe in the mission of transforming trauma into hope and action with mixed status families. So then now we have been able to bring programming into the schools. We're like fifth and sixth graders, where we're talking about identity, about healing, about social emotional learning practices, to having fellowships with our high school and college age students to build that social capital, because 100% of our students are first generation students. And we know that struggle. We don't have like mom or uncle that we can call on and say, hey, how do you fill in like application, college application? But also building the capacity of young people to become not only the storytellers, but the strategists of their own lives. I think for so long, I had to bear witness and experience that many, specifically national organizations, they wanted my story, but they didn't want my strategy. So how are we intentional about really building that leadership capacity within our young people, that they have the tools to self-advocate because they have incredible voices and incredible solutions because they're the closest to the problem? And how do we support them in that journey to make schools and communities more equitable, regardless of immigration status? We have taken people to Washington, D.C. to advocate. I am a 5'2" for those who are listening. So I'm quite petite. I drove like a 15-passenger van all the way to Washington, D.C., where we talked to like every single senator multiple times, to the exception of just Senator McConnell and Leader Schumer. So other than that, we talked to every single senator multiple times, advocating to now one of our biggest successes, which is now that Arizona voters will get to decide in-state tuition. So it's been really incredible and really humbling to be in this journey where we have serve over 50,000 people through our programs of healing, empowerment, and community organizing, really grounded in that intersection of education, mental health, and the arts with the immigrant community. So we have had incredible supporters from Zoom who are supporting our mental health initiatives, and we were recognized as one of the 8 leaders in the whole world. So not only US, but global of supporting mixed immigration status families. So I just feel really overwhelmed with emotion about all the support and being really grounded that why are we doing this? We're doing this because we want to make sure that the healing and the potential of our young people and their families is recognized, because we are way more than our traumas and the pain and the obstacles that we have had to endure to survive.
That is such amazing work. And as you were telling the story of where you are now and where it started, I could totally see how it came full circle of here's the need that I saw in the community. And the organization is going to allow us to create this for the community. And now, as you mentioned, virtually be able to expand that even further. I appreciate all of the work that you're doing in terms of not only caring about the students, but also their families too. That was another thing that you mentioned, the mixed status families and everybody who's impacted by it too. And so I appreciate that. And I want to thank you for that.
No, thank you. I think that one of the most powerful moments has been having those multi generational spaces and having students hear some of the journeys that their parents have to go through. Because sometimes we don't know those stories because they carry pain and they carry trauma. But then having that deeper sense of understanding and belonging, even among families, it's been really powerful to witness.
And then the other part that you mentioned was the leadership development that you're instilling with the students themselves. You mentioned a fellowship program. Is that something where you are offering like a stipend or are able to support the students while they're in high school and potentially college with that leadership program?
Yes, we gotta pay our young people. We have to put our money where our values. The where we say we have to like talk the walk, right? We have to make sure that we're not only like talking, but we're actually walking the talk. And yes, it includes a stipend. So it's a year-long fellowship program that mirrors the school year. So typically they get onboarded in the August, September, and then they finish up and wrap up with graduation in June. We started with 5 fellows. The first cohort, we are on our fourth cohort with 20 fellows. So it's been
Wow.
incredible growth. And a lot of it, the way that it works, we bring them together as a cohort once a month. And then we provide coaching and support once a week and bi-weekly to really build that community of practice to support students, as I said, in their educational journey. And we're very intentional about bringing high school and community college students. So it's not only high school or colleges, we were very intentional about bringing both. So then we can be making those connections and building upon our social capital and having that peer to peer mentorship as well. That has been really powerful. Like so many of our fellows then now have gone on and gotten fellowships at CHCI, at the Arizona State Legislature. Some of them right now like are at Harvard University, and they're becoming and training our new fellows. So we're actually prepping up for a training that is coming up with our young people. And now it's really powerful to see the alumni network, because now we have former fellows training future fellows, and it's been really full circle and being able to see them thrive and take that ownership of not only their education, but their immigration story, and know that they have a responsibility and a whole village that supports their leadership, and knowing that at the end of the day, the way that we describe leadership is enabling others to do good in the midst of uncertainty and achieve a common goal, right? So really being able to tell them like, okay, we see all these problems within the schools or our communities, like what do we want to do about it? And now we have former fellows that really pioneer and constructed a DACA and mixed status families assemblies at high schools where they presented in front of whole school bodies. And then now all their high schools have adopted that model. And now students who are not even immigrants get to hear about our experiences and be building those connections of empathy and bridging those gaps that sometimes are so critical to build equity and inclusive classrooms and communities.
And as you're talking about that leadership development, I'm thinking about sustainability and the ripple effect that it's having. That you might change one high school in that moment, but then ultimately it's going to impact everybody in that high school and then ideally cross over to other high schools, and just the powerfulness of it to be able to continue distributing that knowledge. And like you said, take leadership and take ownership for their own advocacy work as well. So that sounds really, really amazing. In Arizona, what are some of the challenges that undocumented DACA students or mixed status students face today? We talked a little bit about the history, but as the political climate continues to change, what are some of the things that you've noticed as current challenges for today?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest barriers that I've been speaking throughout is the lack of access to institution and opportunities. I would say that it really depends on the age group, right? I was mentioning that we have elementary programs, and a lot of our students through art making, because we use art as a vehicle of healing, have been drawing, like walls and themselves in one side and their mom in the other side. So our little kiddos are still growing up in an environment that they feel that they're going to be separated at any minute, and that they carry that. And for us, it's about being able to name some of these feelings and let them know that they're not alone, and that even though that policies, we don't know when they're going to change, right? Some of that is sometimes out of our control. We can push and push and do the best we can, but at the end of the day, like, elected officials are the ones that make laws. I think it's understanding about how do we build that emotional capacity as well for our people to continue to carry on. So a lot of it, we're still seeing a lot of lack of knowledge and understanding. We started doing more policy work at the district level because we heard of a teacher who has a professional program that invites professionals to come and read aloud, which sounds really great, right? Like, oh my gosh, then the kids can start seeing themselves in different professions. And this teacher ended up inviting an ICE agent. So you can imagine for the immigrant community what that meant. We had kids who were in elementary school going to the nurse office and crying and in being an emotional turmoil because a lack of competence and culturally competence of this educator that didn't think about the ramifications of bringing an ICE agent to the classroom. So we're still seeing a lot of those barriers of not having institutions emerging in best practices for newcomers, for immigrant students and mixed status families. There's still this, because of the polarization. I would say that this is not unique to Arizona, but we're seeing the U.S. being more polarized and becoming an us versus them in different camps. That in the high school we're seeing more discrimination. We unfortunately had to do a lot of support with a couple of our fellows that they said that in one of their schools in the bathrooms they were writing that on X date that they were going to kill every person that was a person of color, every student who was a person of color. So, I mean, my heart dropped, right? Like knowing that our kids are going to school, like as little as elementary, all the way to high school and college, and still facing a lot of the racism and prejudice that exists. So there's that cultural component, that's connections that are more interpersonal, versus to also the macro and the policy, right? About not having culturally competent curriculum, not having access to mental health and understanding what would it look like to support immigrant communities in that aspect, to barriers to entry, like in lacking of institution and scholarship. So I would say that there's a lot of work to do, and sometimes it becomes really daunting, but I constantly feel inspired by the tenacity of our students, of that resilience that unfortunately they had to continue to cultivate, because it can be really dark, but at the same time, like, they're not giving up, and we're trying to find little rays of hope in so much darkness.
Thank you for sharing that story. And it's just heartbreaking to hear something as simple as a guest speaker, how much impact it could have on a whole community, not only for that day, but for the days to come, and that all the pain that goes with it. I'm wondering, as you were sharing that story and the one about high school students and all the injustices that they're dealing with on a daily basis, have you found the schools to be receptive to that advocacy work of saying, here's how you could be more of an undocu ally here, or here's maybe we could do a training for your teachers, or maybe we could do something like that? Are schools generally receptive to that kind of work, or is it often put on the students themselves to be the ones advocating?
I think that we have made a lot of progress in that area within Aliento. I think that we have really taken upon ourselves to bring awareness to some of these heartbreaking stories and experiences that our students and families are going through. I want to share a couple bright spots. Like we had listening sessions that we work with the superintendent of the largest school district in Arizona that serves over 65,000 students. And we had a student listening sessions where the students were able to share their experiences and recommendations to the superintendent. And we also had an opportunity to do it with parents. We organized our students' parents to do that, and we flipped the narrative. We actually had equipment, and instead of translating to English for the parents, we translated the Spanish that was being shared. We led the whole meeting in Spanish and translated what was happening to the superintendent. So we, like changing just like those things to build that empathy, that was really insightful. We've also have a really strong partnership with one of our elementary schools that we have been there for 3 years, going on our fourth, and have put up an art gallery. Parents have been very excited about it, and the principal completely understands the power of really investing not only in the social emotional support for the students, but we also do professional development for teachers, because it should not be only put on the students. We need to also educate the adults around that, and how do we make it accessible for adults to engage with the material as well. And then now we have like this really cool partnership with the largest high school district in Arizona, where every year we provide professional development for educators and counselors, that they get a credit for them to go, like professional development credit hours, so then they can continue to invest in their journey of becoming friendly and becoming more allies and supporters of mixed immigration status communities. So it's been really great. I mean, a lot of hard work, but I would say that, of course, there's schools that are not as receptive, but then we try to focus on where's the window of opportunity to making sure that we continue to build.
And as you mentioned, focusing on those strategies that might work with one school that could be replicated with another. The fact that you could have a listening session led by the students in Spanish and led by the parents in Spanish, I feel like that's always amazing to be able to leverage and heighten the Spanish language to also have them understand the importance of that language in addition to the identity as well. So thank you for sharing those examples. So, what are some resources that you have found to be helpful in terms of supporting undocumented students or documented students throughout their educational journey? And I don't know if in this one we want to focus more on the transition from high school to college, but other resources that you think might be important for people to know about.
I think that a lot of the resources is around making sure that other educators know that like mental health is really important. It's not only like the tactical support about doing that transition to college specifically, but also that emotional support. It's really hard to constantly face a lot of notes, and sometimes we end up not applying for scholarships because we don't want to go through another heartbreak. So it's not because students don't want to try hard, they don't want to do it. It's just because it's really devastating to continuously hear no, 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 or like, show me your social security number and then we'll get you the scholarship. So I think that it's really important for schools and educators to build their capacity and knowledge to understand how applying for college can be traumatic for some students, but also knowing that you don't have to do it alone, that there's organizations like Aliento that are doing incredible work, from like compiling lists of scholarships that are like undocumented or DACA friendly, to be able to provide these professional developments. We tell our educators and counselors, you do not have to be an expert, you just have to care. There's organizations like us, like many other organizations that are doing this work, that this is where our expertise lands. So you just have to care and being willing to be an ambassador and share those resources with your students. So if you're listening in and you're an educator or a counselor, like my plea to you is just to care and go to resources like Aliento, that we are always putting the latest news. We have now like arts and healing workshops and group therapy that we partner with therapists that are licensed to support the undocumented and mixed status community. And we do that at Not Coast, and we also do it virtually. So definitely like check us out. Geography doesn't have to be a barrier to entry and to supporting our undocumented students and mixed status families.
Is it the best practice to go to the website or social media? What is the best way to get informed or stay connected with Aliento?
That's a great question. I would say that the best way is to go through our social media or sign up to our email list. You can go to our website, alientoac.org, and you can find all our social medias there. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we piloted TikTok last year with our students. They were leading that. So hopefully you're going to be seeing us more on TikTok this year. I have a couple of like cool students that have great ideas that we're just supporting them and being their cheerleaders. So social media is the way that you can get more like breaking news, updated in the moment resources. And then our email is like you get them occasionally, just if you want to have everything aggregated in one spot. So definitely like check us out, and don't be afraid of reaching out if you have a question that you haven't found on the website or on social media, you can just email us and then we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And then we are a firm believer that in order to support mixed status families, like this is bigger than Aliento. So we like to be a really good partner. And if we don't do those resources, like for example, sometimes teachers ask us, hey, my student needs to see an attorney. We're not attorneys at Aliento, but we'll connect you with a trusted partner that can direct you a little bit more in that direction.
Thank you so much. And if people want to support Aliento, or what are action items that people can take to support not only Aliento, but also undocumented students?
So I would say that number one is just caring. I think that caring goes long ways. Like you don't have to be an expert, you just have to care. Number two, really follow us on social media. Make sure that you're being a good ally, spread the word. You never know who might be suffering in silence. You never know that maybe someone that you know might be undocumented or might have an undocumented family member. So sharing those visual representations or information, it's a big message because you're telling your community that you're someone that they can trust and that they can come to for resources. So definitely share those infographics, share that information, not only from Aliento, but from other organizations that you see that are credible and are doing incredible work. And then number three, like really maybe think about not going to Starbucks once a month and using those $5 to really donate to organizations like Aliento. We really depend on our grassroots donors. Like it's really motivating to see that many of our students even give more money than some adults, because they really believe in the mission. So even $5 go a long way, like from buying supplies, from being able to have the tools to support our students and families. Like definitely I would really appreciate for you to donate, especially local organizations that are doing a lot of the work in the ground.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing all those ways that people can stay engaged and support not only documented, and also mixed status families. And I just want to say thank you again for being on the show. I continue to learn a lot more from you, and I'm always amazed by all the amazing work that you're doing. Thank you for all of that work, and thank you for being on the podcast with us today.
Thank you, Gerardo. It was so wonderful to connect with you again.
So, for the listeners out there, as Reina said, please make sure to go and follow Aliento on social media. If you're able to donate, please go ahead and donate. And also, just stay tuned as we continue learning more about how to support undocumented, documented, and different immigrant communities. Thank you for listening, and hope you have a great day.